The 2 a.m. F train wasn't a place for miracles. It was a metal tube rattling through the dark, carrying the tired, the lonely, and the just getting by. Leo hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in 3 years, not since his daughter Macy was born. His jacket was worn thin at the elbows. Her head was a warm weight against his chest, finally asleep. And so, softly, almost inaudibly over the train's groan, he began to sing. He didn't know the woman in the designer headphones across the aisle had just won a Grammy. He didn't know she had stopped breathing. He only knew the vibration in his own throat, and the single most important person in the world was safe in his arms. For 30 more seconds, that was the entire story. The man was Leo. The woman was Ava Vance. In that instant, two lives that should never have intersected were about to become one story. One, a single father who hadn't sung for anyone but his daughter in 5 years. The other, a producer who had listened for that specific, raw and untrained tone across 1,000 audition rooms and never heard it. She pressed record. And in doing so, she asked a question that would unravel both their lives. What happens when a miracle is witnessed, but the person creating it doesn't believe in miracles anymore? To understand why that moment was impossible, you need to know about the 5 years that came before it. Leo hadn't planned on being a single father. He was a musician, a guitarist in a promising Brooklyn indie band called the Grey Hours. They had a manager, a small but loyal following, and were 3 weeks away from their first proper tour when his girlfriend, Chloe, told him she was pregnant. The band was his life. But when Macy was born, with Chloe's postpartum depression turning into a silent retreat from motherhood, Leo made a choice. He sold his favorite guitar, the 1965 Fender Jaguar, to pay for diapers and a security deposit on a studio apartment in Queens. The band played the tour without him. They never mentioned his name again. He took a job as a night custodian at a midtown office building. The hours were 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week. It paid just enough to cover rent and daycare, which was a blessed 8 hours of sleep for him if he could get home and collapse fast enough. He stopped singing because singing reminded him of the person he used to be, and that person felt like a stranger, a careless stranger. The only exception was Macy. For her, he sang old folk songs, lullabies, the melody lines from his band's unfinished demos. It was a secret language between them, a thread of the man he once was, passed directly into her small, sleeping form. Meanwhile, 40 blocks downtown in a recording studio that cost more per hour than Leo's monthly rent, Ava Vance was hitting a wall. At 38, she had 3 Grammys, a reputation for spotting raw talent, and a growing, private fear that she had lost the ability to hear it. The industry had become a machine of algorithms and prepackaged stars. She was tired of perfect voices that felt empty. She was searching for what she called the fracture, that imperfection in a voice, the lived-in quality that couldn't be auto-tuned. She hadn't found it in 2 years. Her label was pressuring her for the next hit. Her own doubt was a constant, low hum. The night of the F train, Leo was running on 48 hours with only naps. Macy had a fever, daycare wouldn't take her. His brother, who sometimes helped, was out of town. Leo had called in sick, knowing it meant losing a day's pay he couldn't afford to lose. By 10 p.m., Macy's fever broke. By midnight, he was out of groceries. The 24-hour bodega was 3 subway stops away. He bundled her up, her cheek hot against his neck, and descended into the station. He was so tired he didn't notice the world around him. He didn't see the woman who boarded at 34th Street, her headphones around her neck, her face drawn with the same creative exhaustion he used to know. When he began to sing, it wasn't a performance. It was a reflex, a worn-out circuit from his old life flickering on to comfort his child. He sang Hallelujah, but not the famous Leonard Cohen version. He sang the Jeff Buckley arrangement, the one he'd played 100 times in Brooklyn basements, his voice dropping to a frayed whisper on the verses, then finding a clear, aching tone on the chorus he hadn't used in years. He didn't open his eyes. He didn't see the woman across the aisle freeze. He didn't see her fumble for her phone, her professional composure gone. He only felt the vibration in his chest, the one that used to mean he was alive, now meant his daughter was asleep. Ava Vance, for the first time in 2 years, heard the fracture. It was in the way his voice caught on the word cold. It was in the unvarnished, unprotected delivery of a man who had no idea he was being heard. Her producer's brain, always working, isolated the sound from the rumble of the train. No training, no technique, just pure unmediated emotion. She recorded 45 seconds, then the train jolted into the 14th Street station. Leo's eyes snapped open. He gathered Macy, stood up, and stepped onto the platform without a glance left or right, disappearing into the sparse crowd. Ava was left holding her phone, the recording still open. She played it back, just the audio, through her $1,000 headphones. In the sterile silence of the studio cans, it was even more devastating. She knew with absolute certainty that this was the voice she'd been searching for, but she had no name, no face really, except the memory of a tired man in a worn jacket. She had a 45-second clip and a problem. How do you find a ghost in a city of 8 million? She did the only thing she could think of. She called her assistant at 3 a.m. I need you to pull every bit of footage from the MTA for the northbound F train between 34th and 14th Street from around 1:45 a.m. to 2. Find me the car number. Then get me the station security footage for 14th Street at 2:03 a.m. It was a long shot, an invasion of privacy, and potentially a career-ending move if handled wrong. But Ava had built her career on knowing when to break the rules. What she didn't know was that Leo, halfway home, had felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. He felt seen in a way that terrified him. It was the same feeling he'd had on stage before everything fell apart. He pushed it down. It was just the exhaustion, just the late hour. He had a sick child and a shift to somehow work in 7 hours. Miracles didn't happen on the F train. But as he put Macy back to bed, a single, treacherous thought broke through. For 45 seconds, he had remembered who he was, and someone, somewhere, might have heard it. Ava's investigation moved with the cold efficiency of money and desperation. By 10 a.m., her assistant had the car number 7214. By noon, a discreet security consultant, paid triple his usual fee, had retrieved the station footage from 14th Street. The pixelated black and white video showed a man with a child on his shoulder exiting the train, turning left, and taking the stairs to the 7th Avenue exit. The consultant followed his digital ghost through 3 more cameras, crossing 14th, heading west, then disappearing into the residential canyon of the West Village. The trail went cold at the door of a 24-hour bodega on Hudson Street. But Ava had a voice, and in the modern world, a voice is a fingerprint. She took the raw audio, cleaned it of the worst train noise, and ran it through a proprietary vocal recognition software used by a film studio she consulted for. The software didn't match any known professional recording. It was, as she suspected, a true unknown. This only made her more determined. She did the thing she had sworn she would never do. At 4 p.m., sitting in her immaculate soundproofed office, she uploaded a 30-second clip to a private server and sent it to 3 people: her lawyer, the head of A&R at her label, and a former journalist turned private investigator named Martin Crowe, who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. Her email was one sentence: find the owner of this voice. Discretion is absolute. Across the river in Queens, Leo was fighting a different battle. The lost day's pay meant choosing between a full grocery run or paying the internet bill, which Macy's pediatrician used for telehealth visits. He chose the groceries. The fever was back, a low-grade thrum under his palm when he pressed it to her forehead. He called the after-hours line, was put on hold for 22 minutes, and was finally told it was likely a virus, to keep her hydrated and to bring her in if her temperature hit 104. He sat on the floor next to her toddler bed, a bowl of lukewarm water and a cloth beside him, and watched her sleep. The thought of the train, of the feeling of being heard, felt like a dream from another life, a cruel dream. He didn't know that Martin Crowe had already identified the bodega, that Crowe had called in a favor with a city councilman's office to access the residential building permits for that block, that by 8 p.m., Crowe had a list of 17 buildings within a 5-minute walk of that bodega that contained rent-stabilized units or recent tenant turnovers, the profile of someone living on the edge. He didn't know that Ava was listening to the clip on a loop, sketching musical arrangements in the margins of her notebook, her earlier exhaustion replaced by a focused, almost feverish energy. The first crack in Leo's world came 2 days later. He was mopping the linoleum floor of a law firm's 32nd floor kitchen, the sharp smell of cleaner cutting through the recycled night air. His supervisor, a weary man named Carl, approached holding a business card. Some guy was asking for you at the security desk downstairs. Fancy suit. Said he was an old friend. Carl's tone made it clear he didn't believe it. Leo took the card. It was heavy, cream-colored stock. It read only Martin Crowe, Strategic Resolutions, a phone number with a 212 area code. No company logo, nothing. His blood went cold. What did you tell him? Told him you were busy, Carl said, eyeing him. You aren't in some kind of trouble, are you? We run background checks here. Leo shoved the card in his pocket. No trouble must be a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. When his shift ended at 7 a.m., the man was there, leaning against a black town car idling at the curb, sipping coffee from a paper cup. He was in his 50s with a trim grey beard and the calm, assessing eyes of someone who was paid to look at people and see their pressures. Leo, he said, not a question. Can we talk for 5 minutes? I'm here as a friend. I don't know you, Leo said, his grip tightening on his lunch cooler. You will. My client does. She heard you sing. He held up his phone and played the clip. Leo's own voice, frayed and tender, floated into the morning air. The sound of it, outside the context of the train, of Macy's warmth, felt like a violation. He took a step back. Where did you get that? That's not important, Crowe said. What's important is that the woman who recorded it is Ava Vance. She's a Grammy-winning producer. She believes you have a once-in-a-generation voice. She wants to meet you. The words landed like physical blows. Ava Vance. He knew the name. Everyone who had ever picked up a guitar knew the name. She had launched the career of Sasha Cole, the folk-punk singer whose album had been the soundtrack to his final tour with the band. This was a joke. A cruel, elaborate joke. I have to get home to my daughter, Leo said, turning away. Leo, Crowe called after him, his voice losing its practiced warmth. She's not going to stop. You have a gift. And in my experience, gifts this big don't care about your schedule. They have a timing of their own. Leo walked to the subway in a daze. The card burned in his pocket. He thought about throwing it away, but he didn't. He put it on the small table in his kitchen next to a stack of unpaid bills. It sat there for 3 days. He would look at it while making Macy's oatmeal, a silent, elegant accusation. During those 3 days, Ava Vance, unable to wait, made her first mistake. She took the cleaned-up audio, paired it with a simple, haunting piano melody she'd composed, and created a 90-second track. She played it for her label head, David Chen. He heard it in his Tribeca office, staring out at the Hudson. When it finished, he was silent for a full 30 seconds. Who is it? That's the problem, Ava said. We don't know yet, but we will. David Chen, a man who thought in market sizes and viral coefficients, saw something else. Don't find him yet. Ava blinked. What? If we find him, he becomes a person, with problems, with demands, with a story that might not be clean. He turned from the window. This clip, as it is, it's a mystery. Mysteries are marketable. Post it. No name, no face, just the voice. Let the internet do what it does. Let them want. The desire will be part of the product. Ava felt a ripple of disgust. She had wanted to find the man, not the brand. But a smaller, pragmatic part of her whispered that David had a point. The pressure from the label was a real financial thing. She agreed to a 48-hour window. They would post the track anonymously at midnight on Friday. Leo knew nothing of this. On Friday morning, he finally picked up the phone. He called the number on the card. Martin Crowe answered on the first ring. I knew you'd call. I want to meet her, Leo said, his voice flat. Just to talk, somewhere public, and I'm bringing my daughter. There was a pause. Crowe was clearly relaying this to someone. He came back on the line. 3 p.m. today, the cafe in the lobby of the Whitby Hotel. She'll be wearing a blue scarf. The meeting was a collision of planets. Ava, in her architect's black, sat at a corner table, her coffee untouched. She saw Leo before he saw her. He looked younger than in the grainy footage and more exhausted. He carried a little girl on his hip, her head buried in his shoulder. His jeans were clean but faded. His jacket was the same one from the train. Her heart, the producer's heart that had only heard the instrument, suddenly saw the whole, fragile orchestra of his life. She stood up as he approached. Leo, I'm Ava, thank you for coming. He didn't smile. He sat, settling Macy on his lap. You had me followed to my job. It was an accusation, not a greeting. Ava flinched. I needed to find you. The recording, it's extraordinary. It was private, he said, his voice low but firm. Macy peeked out, her big eyes taking in Ava. It was for her, not for you. Ava nodded, swallowing her prepared speech about destiny and opportunity. I understand that, and I apologize for the intrusion, truly. But now that I have heard it, I can't unhear it, and I believe you need to be heard. Leo shook his head. You don't know anything about me. I have a job. I have her. I don't have time for whatever this is. What if it could change everything? Ava leaned forward. What if it meant you didn't have to work nights anymore? What if it meant security for her? She saw the words hit their mark. His eyes flickered to Macy, then back to her. The defensiveness softened just a fraction into a wary calculation. How? A development deal, Ava said. A small advance enough to cover your bills for a few months. We work together in the studio. We see what's there. No promises, but every possibility. She placed a single piece of paper on the table. It was a term sheet. The advance figure was $25,000. For Leo, who had $63 in his bank account, it was a number from a fantasy. He stared at it. And if nothing comes of it, then you keep the advance, no strings. It was too good to be true, which meant it was a trap, but the trap was lined with everything he needed. I need to think, he said. Of course, Ava said. She pushed a second card toward him, her personal cell. 24 hours, call me. As Leo gathered Macy and left, Ava watched them go. Her excitement was now tempered with a cold splash of reality. The voice was a diamond, but the man was a complex, pressurized piece of stone around it. Extracting it would be messy. Back in her office that evening, she got a frantic call from David Chen. The track, it's up. Early. A junior intern misheard the timing. It's been live for 6 hours. Ava's stomach dropped. She opened the streaming platform. The anonymous track, titled only Untitled Hallelujah, had already been played 50,000 times. It was shared on Twitter. On TikTok, videos were using it as a soundtrack for moments of quiet sacrifice for parental love. The comments were a firestorm of want. Who is this? This voice is destroying me. Find this man. The genie was out of the bottle, and at that exact moment, sitting on his couch with a sleeping Macy, Leo's phone buzzed. It was a text from his former bandmate Jake. The message was just a link. Leo clicked it. He heard his own voice, now polished and paired with piano flowing from his phone's speaker. Underneath, the play count ticked upward. 51,052. He scrolled through the comments, the public yearning, the speculation. His face was not attached to it. But his voice, the most private part of him he had left, was now public property. He felt exposed, hunted. And then he looked at Martin Crow's card and at Ava Vance's card beside it. He had 24 hours to decide, but the world, it seemed, had already decided for him. The door to his old, quiet life was closing, and he was standing in the threshold, holding his daughter, with no idea what was on the other side. Leo signed the contract at his kitchen table, with Macy eating cereal beside him. The $25,000 hit his bank account 3 hours later. The first thing he did was pay the internet bill, the pediatrician bill, and 6 months of rent in advance. The relief was so physical it made him dizzy. He called Ava. Okay, he said. What now? Now, she said. You come to the studio. Tonight, we see what we have. That first session was a disaster. The vocal booth at Avatar Studios felt like a sterile glass coffin. The headphones were too tight. The microphone, a vintage Newman worth more than his car, seemed to judge him. Ava on the other side of the glass was all business. Just sing like you did on the train, forget I'm here. But he couldn't forget. Every time he opened his mouth, the sound that came out was tense, thin, controlled. The fracture was gone. They worked for 3 hours and got nothing usable. Ava tried to hide her frustration, but Leo saw it in the set of her shoulders. It's okay, she said. First day jitters. We'll try again tomorrow. But tomorrow was worse. The anonymous track, Untitled Hallelujah, had now surpassed 2 million streams. Music blogs were running contests to identify the singer. A popular podcast dedicated an entire episode to the mystery of the subway saint. With every click, the pressure in the studio grew. Leo would see the play count on Ava's computer screen and freeze. He was trying to reproduce a moment of pure, private emotion on an industrial schedule. After the fourth failed session, David Chen from the label showed up. He listened to 5 minutes of strained vocals, then gestured for Ava to join him outside. Leo, alone in the booth, could see them through the glass. He couldn't hear them, but he didn't need to. David's dismissive wave said it all. We have a viral sensation with no face and a singer who can't sing when it counts, David said, his voice low. This is becoming a very expensive problem. Ava defended him. It's psychological. The environment is wrong. He needs time. Time is the one thing we don't have, David snapped. The buzz has a half-life. We need to capitalize. If he can't deliver in the studio, we pivot. We use the viral audio, build a track around it with session singers filling in, and release it as a single. He gets a featuring credit and a smaller cut. Ava was horrified. That's fraud, and it will kill whatever is actually in him. David shrugged. It's business, talk to him. Ava didn't talk to him. Instead, she did something reckless. She cancelled the next studio booking. She picked Leo and Macy up in a cab, drove them out of the city to a rented house in Cold Spring, New York, with a view of the Hudson River. She brought only a simple portable recorder. No glass, no clock, no label, guys, she said. Just sing for her like you did before. For 2 days they lived in a bubble. Leo cooked. Macy played in the leaves. And in the evenings, as Macy fell asleep on the couch, Leo would sing old folk songs, lullabies. Ava would turn on the recorder and leave the room, capturing the raw, unfiltered sound from the hallway. It worked. The fear in his voice vanished. The fracture returned, wider and more beautiful than before. Ava stayed up all night listening to the takes, her heart pounding. She had it, the real thing. She called David, triumphant. I have the vocals for the first single. They're perfect. We go into production next week. There was a long pause on the line. Ava, David said, his voice strangely quiet. You need to come back to the city now. There's something you need to see. While they were in Cold Spring, the internet, in its relentless, invasive way, had found a name. A user on a music forum, someone who had been in the Brooklyn indie scene years ago, heard a snippet of the viral track played on a radio show. They posted a comment, sounds a lot like Leo James, guitarist for the Grey Hours. He dropped off the earth years ago, had a kid, I think. That comment was a spark. Another former acquaintance dug up an old, low-quality YouTube video of the Grey Hours playing a basement show. The lead singer was different, but during a harmony part, you could hear a distinctive tonal quality in the backing vocals. The same quality as the Subway recording. They isolated the audio, lined it up. It was a match. By the time Ava returned to her office, the story was already trending. Subway singer identified as former Brooklyn musician. But it didn't stop there. The digital sleuths kept digging. They found a 5-year-old blog post from Chloe, Leo's ex, on a now-defunct motherhood site. The post was a raw, bitter rant about her partner choosing his stupid band over his family, about her struggle with postpartum depression and her decision to leave. She didn't name him, but the details lined up. The narrative, in the public's eye, began to twist. The saintly single father was now a complicated figure, a man who had perhaps abandoned his musical dreams, but also a man someone had felt abandoned by. The final devastating blow came from Chloe herself. Seeing her old post resurrected and attached to Leo's new fame, she gave an interview to a tabloid website. She told her side of the story, Leo's obsession with the band, his initial reluctance about the pregnancy, her lonely struggle. She was portrayed as the wounded party. She ended the interview with a line that went viral on its own. I'm glad he's finally stepping up for our daughter. I just wish it hadn't taken a record deal to make it happen. Leo read the article on his phone in the lobby of Ava's building. His hands shook. The portrait it painted was a funhouse mirror version of his truth, but it contained enough real fragments to be unkillable. The comment sections were a war zone. Half praised him as a devoted dad who had sacrificed everything. The other half condemned him as a deadbeat who was now profiting from a redemption arc he didn't deserve. Macy was no longer just his daughter. She was a prop in a public morality play. Ava's plan to introduce him with a beautiful, heartfelt single was now impossible. The story had metastasized. David Chen, however, saw this not as a crisis, but as a new angle. Controversy is currency, he told Ava, a grim excitement in his voice. We lean into it. We frame the first single as a redemption song. We get a PR firm to shape the narrative. He does a tell-all interview, expresses regret, talks about his growth as a father. The music becomes the soundtrack to his public apology. Ava felt sick. She looked at Leo, who was sitting silently in her office, staring at the floor, looking more broken than she had ever seen him. He was not a singer anymore. He was a problem to be managed, a story to be packaged. That night, Leo received a certified letter. It was from a law firm representing Chloe. Given his newfound financial stability, they were petitioning for a formal modification of their informal custody arrangement. They were seeking formal child support, back payments, and requested a psychological evaluation to determine the stability of his home environment, citing the media frenzy as a potential source of harm for Macy. The advance money, the very thing that was supposed to secure his life with his daughter, was now being used as a weapon to potentially take her away. Leo didn't call Ava. He sat in the dark of his apartment, the only sound Macy's even breathing from the other room. He had walked through the door his viral fame had opened, and it had led him here, to a studio where he choked, to a public that hated him, to a past that had risen from the grave to haunt him, and to a legal threat against the only thing that mattered. The gift, as Martin Crowe had said, had a timing of its own, and its timing was destroying him. He had a choice to make, but every option seemed to lead to a different kind of loss. He could quit, return the advance, and go back to being invisible, but the legal case might still proceed. He could press on, become the product David Chen wanted him to be, and sell the truth of his life for a lie that would pay the bills. Or he could find a third way, a path that neither the label, nor the internet, nor his past had yet imagined. The noise of the world was a roar in his ears. But for the first time since that night on the F train, a quiet, defiant thought began to form in the silence beneath it. The third way began with a phone call, but not to a lawyer and not to Ava. Leo called Chloe. He didn't argue, he didn't defend himself. He simply said, "You're right to be worried about the frenzy, I am too. I want to fix this for Macy. Can we talk, just us?" There was a long silence on the other end, then a single word: when. They met in a park, a neutral place. Chloe looked older, wearier than he remembered. The anger in the article was gone, replaced by a guarded anxiety. He didn't bring up the past. He talked about the present, the advance money, the media storm, his fear. He showed her the legal letter. "I don't want to fight you," he said. "I want Macy to be safe. I want her to have a mother in her life. What if we use some of this money to create something stable for her, for both of you?" He proposed setting up a college fund for Macy with a portion of the advance and providing Chloe with a lump sum to help her get back on her feet, no legal strings attached. In return, they would formalize a fair, shared custody arrangement without lawyers and psychologists tearing them apart. He was buying peace, not for himself, but for his daughter's world. Chloe, who had expected a battle, was disarmed. She agreed. With that fire contained, Leo turned to the other one. He walked into Ava's office with David Chen present and said, "I'm not doing the redemption interview. I'm not apologizing for my past in a press release. The music isn't an apology, it's just music." David started to argue, but Ava held up a hand. She was watching Leo. For the first time, he wasn't pleading or afraid. He was stating a fact. "Then what are you proposing?" she asked. "We release the song we made in Cold Spring, the one with the real vocals. We release it with my name, no PR narrative, no angle, just the song, and we film the video right here." He gestured out her window to the city, on the F train, at 2 a.m. It was a terrible idea from a marketing perspective. It was literal, it was on the nose, and it risked looking like a cheap stunt. David Chen hated it, but Ava heard something else in it: integrity. It was facing the source of the myth head-on and reclaiming it. She overruled David. "We do it." The video shoot was surreal. A closed set on a real F-train car, parked in a maintenance yard. Leo in his same worn jacket, with Macy, played by a sleeping child actor for labor laws, sitting across from Ava, who played herself. The director filmed it simply, intimately, recreating the original moment, but with the haunting, full studio version of the song playing. At the end of the take, Leo, breaking from the script, looked directly into the camera, his face calm, and said, "This was for her. The rest is for anyone who needs it." They kept it in the final cut. The single, titled simply F-Train Hallelujah, was released on a Thursday morning. Ava's label reluctantly backed it without the planned PR blitz. They let the music speak, and it did. Stripped of the salacious backstory, the song connected purely on its emotional terms. It debuted at #1 on the digital singer-songwriter chart. Critics, who had been sharpening their knives for a hype-driven failure, were disarmed by its authenticity. "A stunning act of reclamation," one wrote. "James doesn't perform vulnerability. He channels it from a deep, real well." The legal agreement with Chloe was signed. The public, deprived of a messy feud, slowly lost interest in the backstory. The narrative shifted from deadbeat dad gets famous to reclusive talent delivers breathtaking debut. Leo completed the EP, titled Night Light, over 6 months. He worked only when Macy was at preschool or with Chloe, protecting their routine. The studio became a tool, not a torture chamber. Ava produced, but she followed his lead, building arrangements around the specific, fragile quality of his voice. The finished work was 7 songs, quiet, raw, and centered entirely on the themes of silent love and small, steadfast hours. The final surprise came not from the charts, but from a letter. It arrived at Ava's office, forwarded from the label's General Mail. It was from a woman in Ohio. She wrote that her husband, a night shift nurse, had been killed in a car accident a year earlier. Their 4-year-old daughter had stopped speaking. For months, she had been silent. Then, one night, the woman had been playing the F-Train video on her laptop. The little girl had pointed at the screen, at the sleeping child actor, and whispered, "Daddy sings like that." They were her first words in 11 months. The woman wrote, "You gave me my daughter's voice back. Thank you for not packaging his." Ava showed the letter to Leo. He read it in the studio's kitchen, then walked to the window, his shoulders shaking silently. He wasn't crying from sadness or from pride. He was crying from the sheer, unimaginable weight of the thread that had started on a subway car and reached across a continent to mend something broken. The gift had found its purpose. It wasn't about fame. It was about connection. Nightlight was released in full the following autumn. It didn't explode, it seeped in. It found its audience in waiting rooms, in late-night feeds, in the headphones of other tired people. It sold steadily, enough to secure Leo's life. He bought a small, quiet apartment in Brooklyn with a room for Macy and a nook for his guitar. He didn't tour. He did a handful of live-streamed performances from his living room, with Macy coloring in the background. The pressure was gone. He had built a life where his music and his fatherhood could coexist, not as competing forces, but as the same thing. Ava Vance, for her part, had rediscovered her own ear. She started a new label imprint dedicated to what she called found sound, artists discovered outside the system, with stories woven into their music. Her first signing was a former fisherman from Maine who wrote songs about the sea. The industry called it a niche project. She called it the only thing worth doing. One evening, a year after the album's release, Leo was putting Macy to bed. She was now a vibrant, chatty 5-year-old. As he finished a story, she looked at him, her head tilted. "Daddy," she said, "do you miss singing on the train?" He smiled. "Sometimes, but I like singing here better." "Me too," she said, and closed her eyes. He sat in the dark for a moment, then picked up his guitar. He played the opening chords of F-Train softly. From her bed, without opening her eyes, Macy began to hum the melody. Her small voice intertwined with the strings, a perfect, quiet harmony. He stopped playing just to listen. This was the payoff. Not the money, not the streams, not the silenced critics. This, a safe child in a warm room echoing the song that had saved them both. The circle was complete. The noise of the world was still out there, but in this room there was only music, and it was finally truly theirs. So what do we call a story like this? A fairy tale? A cautionary tale? Perhaps it's something newer, something for our age, a tale of found sound. It begins with a moment of pure accidental truth, a man singing to his child in the dark. That truth is witnessed, recorded, and unleashed into a world that knows only how to turn truth into content. That world tries to package it, label it, and sell it back as a product, complete with a manufactured backstory. But this story had a different ending, because the man at its center, Leo, made a choice that our modern myths often forget. He chose to walk back to the source. He chose to face the exact point of his discovery, not to exploit it, but to reclaim it. He said, in effect, this moment was real. The feeling was real. The music that comes from it will be real. Everything else is noise. We live in an era of relentless curation. Our struggles, our talents, our very identities are so often shaped by the pressure to be legible to an algorithm, to fit a narrative that sells. Leo and Ava's story presents a radical alternative. What if the most valuable thing isn't virality, but integrity? What if the goal isn't to be seen by everyone, but to be understood, truly understood by someone? Ava Vance went searching for a sound and found a man. She found a life. And in the process, she rediscovered her own purpose, not as a hitmaker, but as a curator of genuine human frequency. Leo found a way to use the gift without letting the gift use him, to build a life where his art and his love were not in conflict, but in concert. The 2 a.m. F-Train still runs. It still carries its cargo of the tired and the hopeful. Most stories that begin there end there, lost to the rhythm of the rails. But sometimes, against all odds, a frequency is sent out from that moving metal room. And sometimes, against all odds, it is received by exactly the right ear. Not just an ear that hears talent, but an ear that understands context. An ear that knows the difference between a product and a person. That's the real discovery here. Not a voice, but a connection. A thread that runs from a subway car to a quiet bedroom in Ohio where a child speaks again. That thread is fragile. It can be severed by greed, by fear, by the demand for a simpler story. But when it's held, when it's protected, it carries something more powerful than fame. It carries meaning. We tell these stories of hidden talent and sudden discovery because they speak to our deepest hope that what is most true about us might be seen and valued before it's too late. Leo's story reminds us that being seen is only the first step. The real work, the brave work, is deciding what you do with the light once it's shining on you. Do you let it define you, or do you use it to see your own path more clearly? The noise of the world is loud, it always will be, but listen. Beneath it, in the quiet spaces, in the honest moments between people, the real music is still being made. Thanks for listening to this one. If you want to hear more stories that go beyond the headline, be sure to subscribe. We'll see you next time.